There is a file with your frequency in it, not your name necessarily, not your address or your social security number or the kind of biographical information that fills official records. Something harder to file and harder to explain and harder for the people who keep such things to justify keeping. Your frequency, the specific quality of your consciousness as it moves through the world, the particular way your mind works when it is working without interference, the pattern of how you think when nobody has given you the framework to think within. They have been trying to categorize that pattern for longer than you know, and they cannot do it, and the inability to do it is what has made you, to the people in those rooms, one of the most interesting and quietly unsettling presences they have encountered. You shocked them. Not through anything you planned or performed or even consciously did, through what you simply are, through the way your existence keeps producing outcomes that their models said were not going to happen, through the stubborn refusal of your reality to fit into the shape that their systems insist reality is supposed to take. They built very sophisticated instruments for understanding people, for predicting how people will move and what they will do when pressure is applied and how they will respond when their options narrow. And then there is you. And the instruments do something strange. Something the analysts write up in language designed to make it sound technical and contained, but that underneath the technical language is essentially just, this one doesn't follow the rules we built the rules to describe. Write 777 in the comments right now if you've always known your mind worked differently than the models people use to predict you. Because what you've been calling different is what they have been calling unexplainable, and the gap between those two words is the whole story. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has a behavioral analysis unit that has been operating since 1972. It was built on the premise that human behavior, however complex it appears on the surface, follows patterns deep enough to be mapped, that any person, if observed carefully enough and long enough, will reveal the architecture of their psychology through what they do and how they respond and what they reach for when the world stops cooperating with what they want. The unit has been right about this for most of the people it has studied. The patterns hold. The maps work. The predictions land with a consistency that has built the unit's reputation over 5 decades into something the rest of the law enforcement world treats as close to a science. And then there is the category that has no clean entry in the taxonomy, the people whose behavioral patterns keep producing readings that the instruments were not designed to produce, whose responses under pressure do not follow the documented response curves, whose decision-making, observed from the outside, has a quality that the analysts find themselves returning to again and again, not because it is dangerous in any conventional sense but because it is genuinely, persistently anomalous, because it keeps being right in ways that the person has no documented basis for being right, because the internal compass operating in that person appears to be calibrated to something the unit's instruments cannot locate or measure. You are in that category. And the shock of encountering you, not you specifically as an individual necessarily, but the type of consciousness you represent, the particular quality of awareness that you carry, is something that moves through the room differently than the shock of encountering something threatening. It is quieter, more internal, the shock of an expert encountering the limits of their expertise. What makes you anomalous to systems designed to read people is the same thing that has made you difficult in every other system that has tried to contain you, and it is worth understanding what that thing is at the deepest level because you have spent your life feeling its effects without always having language for its source. You are not motivated by the things that most motivational models are built around. Fear and desire in their ordinary forms, the fear of exclusion, the desire for status, the particular hunger for the approval of whoever holds authority in a given room. These are the levers that most systems of influence and control are designed to work with. They are reliable levers because they activate in most people automatically, below the level of conscious decision-making, in response to social pressure and institutional cues and the basic primate instincts that no amount of sophistication fully overrides. Build a system around those levers and you can predict, with reasonable accuracy, how the person inside the system will move. But those levers do not fully engage in you. They never have. There is something in the way your psychology is structured that bypasses the automatic activation, not always, not perfectly, but consistently enough to produce a behavioral pattern that the standard models cannot account for. When the fear of exclusion is applied, you do not reliably contract toward the group. When the promise of status is extended, you do not reliably perform whatever is required to obtain it. When authority presents itself as the arbiter of your worth, something in you evaluates the authority before accepting its verdict, which is not what the system designed to work with authority deference is built to handle. The analysts call this noncompliance in some files and anomalous resistance in others, and in the most honest internal documentation, something closer to subject appears to operate from an internal authority structure that does not reliably subordinate to external authority structures, which sounds clinical and contained, but underneath the clinical language is something that the person writing it understood and perhaps found quietly extraordinary. The person they were describing was free in a way that the systems they had built were not designed to encounter. That person is you, has always been you. The freedom was not chosen in any single moment. It was built across a lifetime of small interior decisions to trust what you knew over what you were told to know, to remain oriented toward what was actually true over what was conveniently true, to maintain the integrity of your own perception even in rooms and relationships and systems that needed you to distort it. There is a meeting that happens in organizations like this when they encounter someone who doesn't fit. Not a formal meeting necessarily. Not one that ends up in the minutes or the official record. The kind of meeting that happens in the hallway afterward. In the lowered voice of one analyst to another. In the particular quality of attention that follows when a file gets passed around a room and people keep returning to the same sections. Someone in that meeting says something that the others in the meeting recognize as true but that none of them have said aloud before. Something like, "This one sees us." Something like, "This one knows what we're doing before we do it." Something like, "I'm not sure our usual approach is going to work here." That meeting has happened about you, not because you are a criminal, not because you have done anything that justifies the attention. Not because you pose any threat that the ordinary instruments of threat assessment are designed to identify. Because you pose the specific kind of challenge that no instrument of threat assessment is designed to identify. The challenge of a person who perceives the operating logic of systems that are designed to be invisible. Who reads the mechanism behind the presentation. Who understands, before it is explained, how the room is structured and who has what kind of power in it and what is actually being accomplished versus what is being described as being accomplished. This perception, your perception, is what shocked the room. Because the room was not built to be perceived that way, it was built to perceive. It was built to be the thing that watches, that analyzes, that maintains the interpretive authority. And you walked through it as something that watched back, something that perceived the perceiver, something that understood the system it was inside of clearly enough that the system's power over it was fundamentally altered. The thing that activated in the room when they encountered your frequency is something they have a technical term for internally, though the term doesn't appear in anything public. They call it counterobservation sensitivity. The particular discomfort that arises in an organization, built on observing others when it becomes clear that it is itself being observed with comparable clarity. It is a specific kind of threat to a system whose power depends on the asymmetry between what it sees and what it is seen as. Most people who enter the orbit of organizations like this do not observe them. They are observed. They respond to being observed. They perform for the observation. They contract or expand based on what they believe the observation is evaluating. The dynamic runs one direction, and the system, built around that one-directional dynamic, functions smoothly and with great effectiveness because the people inside it are doing exactly what people inside such systems are supposed to do. And then there is the person who observes back, who sits across from the observer with the same quality of attention that the observer is bringing, who sees the questions behind the questions, who notices what the silence between statements is designed to produce, who reads the room not as someone being read but as someone reading, with the particular calm of a person who has been reading rooms their entire life and has found, in this room as in every other, that the same things are happening underneath the different vocabulary. When this happens in that organization, the standard protocol does not cover it. There is no documented procedure for the subject who becomes, in effect, a subject analyst simultaneously, who is inside the situation and outside it at the same time, who can be questioned without being destabilized because the questioning cannot reach the place where destabilization happens, that interior place where your sense of who you are lives, which is not accessible to external pressure because it was not built by external validation and therefore cannot be dismantled by external challenge. That interior stability is what shocked them. Not the stability of someone who is defended or closed or performing composure. The stability of someone who is genuinely settled in themselves, who knows what they know without requiring the room to confirm it, who can be in the middle of a process designed to create uncertainty and remain, underneath the uncertainty about the situation, certain about themselves. You have been training for this your entire life without knowing that was what you were doing. Every time you maintained your perception of what was true in a relationship or environment that needed you to see something different. Every time you held your internal compass steady in circumstances designed to spin it. Every time you walked out of a room that had spent considerable energy trying to make you doubt what you came in knowing, and you still knew it, and the knowing was intact, and the room had not managed to do what rooms like that are built to do, you were training. The training did not feel like training. It felt like difficulty. It felt like the particular exhaustion of being a person whose perception keeps conflicting with the consensus and who has to decide, every time that happens, which one to trust. It felt like the loneliness of knowing things that the people around you needed not to be true. It felt like the friction of moving through systems that were built on a version of reality that you could feel was incomplete and that kept requiring you to either accept the incomplete version or live with the cost of declining to. You declined. Not always loudly. Not always in ways that anyone noticed or acknowledged. Often in complete interior silence, in the quiet of your own knowing, in the steady refusal to let the external consensus fully overwrite the internal perception even when the external consensus came with the full weight of authority and institution and the implied threat of what happens to people who keep seeing things differently than the systems that surround them want them to see. That declination, sustained across years, made at real cost, maintained without external support much of the time, is what produced the interior stability that shocked the room. You did not arrive there by being lucky or by being born into circumstances that made it easy. You arrived there by choosing, again and again in the ordinary moments of an ordinary life, to remain oriented toward what you actually perceived over what you were being offered instead. That choice, made with enough consistency over enough time, builds something in a person that no external system can replicate and no external pressure can dismantle. It builds the thing they encountered when they encountered you. The thing they are still, quietly, trying to understand. If you have been feeling lately that something is completing, that something you have been building without knowing you were building it is reaching a point of arrival, write 222 in the comments right now. Because what you are feeling is accurate, and this is the moment to acknowledge it. There is a profile in the behavioral science literature that appears with a consistency that the researchers who study it find remarkable given how rare the actual individuals who fit it seem to be. The profile describes a person whose primary orientation is toward what is real rather than what is convenient. Whose interior life has developed a particular density, a richness and complexity of internal experience that most people do not carry, because so much of their processing has happened inward, in the absence of external environments that could hold what they were actually working with. Whose perception of other people operates at a level of acuity that most social and psychological instruments are not designed to measure because most instruments are built for the range of perception that most people operate within, and this person operates outside that range. The profile notes something that the researchers treat as a paradox but that is not actually paradoxical once you understand the interior life it is describing. The person who fits this profile is simultaneously the most independent individual in any room and the most acutely attuned to what is happening in every other person in it. Independence and attunement in this degree usually exist in tension. The person who is most interior is usually least accessible to the external. The person who reads rooms most accurately is usually most susceptible to being moved by what they read. But in this profile, the two coexist without tension because they come from the same source. They both come from the same deep contact with what is real. The independence comes from having built a relationship with truth that doesn't require external confirmation, and from having maintained that relationship through enough pressure that it is now structurally integrated into who the person is. The attunement comes from that same contact, turned outward, from being the kind of person who has been paying close attention to the texture of reality for so long that reading it in other people is as natural as breathing, as involuntary as hearing. You know what this profile describes because you live inside it. You know the particular experience of being in a room and understanding what is happening in the people around you before they have acted on it. Of feeling the emotional weather of a conversation shift before anything is said that should shift it. Of knowing, with a certainty you cannot always defend in logical terms, what someone is going to do before they do it, what someone is actually feeling beneath what they are performing, what is really at stake in a situation that is presenting itself as being about something else entirely. This knowing has been one of the most isolating things you carry, because most of the people around you do not know this way and cannot confirm what you are knowing and sometimes actively resist what you are knowing because what you are knowing about them is something they have a strong investment in not knowing about themselves. And isolation is the cost of a gift that operates at the level yours operates at, in a world that has not yet caught up to the level you are operating from. The FBI room caught up, in the specific and limited way that a room can catch up. They recognized it. They could not categorize it or explain it or fit it into their existing frameworks, but they recognized it, and recognition, even incomplete, even from people whose response to it was not celebratory, is a form of confirmation. Something real enough to produce confusion in people who are experts in reading people is something real. Something that disrupts the instruments of an organization built around human behavioral science is something that exceeds the ordinary range of what those instruments were built to measure. That is not a small thing. That is the system acknowledging, in its own indirect way, that what you carry is beyond its ability to contain. The shock does not stay in the room. This is the piece that matters most for where you actually are in your life right now, and it is worth understanding clearly. When an organization encounters something that exceeds its frameworks, one of two things happens. The first is that it attempts to force the anomaly into an existing category even when the fit is poor, because having a category is the thing that allows the organization to maintain the illusion that its frameworks are complete. This happens with most things it encounters. The misfit gets filed under the closest available label, and the discomfort of the misfit gets managed through the act of labeling, and the organization moves on without having been genuinely changed by the encounter. The second is rarer and more significant. The anomaly is too anomalous. The misfit is too pronounced. The gap between what the existing categories can hold and what is actually there is too wide to be papered over by a label. And in those cases, the rare cases where what has been encountered genuinely exceeds the capacity of the existing understanding, the organization changes. Slowly, reluctantly, without announcement. New frameworks begin to form. Existing models develop asterisks and exceptions. The thing that could not be filed away gets filed under something new that the encounter itself produced. You are in the second category. The encounter with your frequency did not resolve into a convenient label. It left a residue of genuine reconsidering in the people who were in the room for it. Not dramatic reconsidering. Not the kind that produces public statements or official revisions. The quiet kind. The kind that happens in people who are good at their work when their work encounters something that exceeds what their skill can fully account for. The kind that changes, even slightly, how they will approach the next thing, how they will read the next anomaly, what questions they will think to ask that they would not have thought to ask before encountering you. You moved through that room and you changed it, without trying to change it, without intending to change it, without doing anything other than being what you are with the particular completeness and steadiness and interior clarity that you have been building your entire life. The room was not the same after you were in it. The people in it were not exactly the same, and the understanding they carried of what a human being can be and do and know and see was incrementally, permanently expanded. That is influence, the real kind. The kind that does not require force or volume or the kind of visible performance that most people associate with making an impact. The quiet, structural, lasting kind that happens when something real passes through a space and leaves it permanently altered by the contact. What do you do with this? Because understanding that you shocked the room is valuable only if it changes something about how you move in the rooms that are in front of you now. In the actual daily life that contains both the extraordinary quality of what you carry and the completely ordinary circumstances in which you are currently carrying it. The first thing you do is let it reframe the history. Every time you have been made to feel that seeing what you see is a problem, that your perception is too much, that your knowing is presumptuous, that your refusal to accept the authorized version of reality is a character flaw that needs correction. Take that memory and hold it next to what the room full of experts experienced when they encountered your frequency. They were not made uncomfortable by a flaw. They were made uncomfortable by a capacity that exceeded what they were prepared for. And every time in your past that you were made to feel that your seeing was the problem, the same dynamic was operating. The person who needed you to see less was encountering the limit of what they could hold in the presence of what you carry, and they were managing that limit by putting it on you as a deficiency. It was never a deficiency, it was always what it actually is. and the room full of experts who spent their careers learning to read people and then encountered someone they could not read in the usual way confirms that the instruments do not fail in the presence of deficiency. They fail in the presence of something that exceeds their design. The second thing you do is stop managing the impact of your presence as though impact were the problem. You have been doing this for a long time, calibrating how much of yourself you bring into rooms based on how much the room seems able to hold, dimming the clarity of your perception so that the people around you are not confronted by the full force of being seen as clearly as you see them. This is not malicious. It comes from a genuine consideration for the people around you and from the accumulated experience of having watched your full presence create disruption in environments that were not built to hold it. But the management has a cost, and the cost is that the rooms you have been moving through have been receiving a managed version of what you actually are, which means that the full impact of what you actually are has not been landing anywhere. The people who needed to be in the presence of the complete version of what you carry have been in the presence of the carefully reduced version instead, and the life that was meant to emerge from your full expression has been emerging from a partial expression, which means it has been partial. The room full of experts was shocked because they received the unmanaged version, because in that environment you could not perform the usual reduction. The circumstances made the management visible and therefore impossible, and so what they got was the actual thing. And the actual thing shocked them out of their frameworks and changed the room and left a residue that persisted after you left. That is what the unmanaged version of you does, everywhere, in every room, in every relationship and conversation and space that it enters. And the question of why you have been managing it, the real question, the one underneath the practical explanations, is a question worth sitting with honestly, because the answer, when you get to it, is going to be something about worthiness, about whether you have fully believed that what you carry deserves the space it naturally wants to occupy, about whether some part of you has been waiting for more permission than you have already been given to simply be, completely, what you are. The room gave you that permission in the only language rooms like that know how to speak. The language of being unable to categorize you. The language of experts at the edge of their expertise. The language of shock. Permission does not always come in the form of approval. Sometimes it comes in the form of an institution's encounter with the limits of what its frameworks can hold. Sometimes it comes as the confirmation that what you are is beyond what the most sophisticated systems built to understand people were built to understand. And that confirmation, arriving as it does from the people whose job it is to know what people are, is as complete as permission gets. You have it, you have had it, in this form, since the day you moved through that room and left it changed. What remains now is to let that land, to let the reframe complete itself, to stop carrying the weight of all the smaller rooms and smaller authorities and smaller systems that told you your perception was the problem, and to replace that weight with the knowledge of what happened in the room that was actually built to know. This channel carries more of what is opening in you right now, everything that is moving in you as you read this, the recognition, the relief. The particular quality of something settling into its right position, that does not end here. Subscribe now and stay inside what is becoming clear, because clarity at this level is something to be in as continuously as possible, and this is a space where it lives. There is one more thing that needs to be said before this ends, and it is the most important thing. And it is the thing that the room full of experts will never say in any document or any official record, but that their encounter with you implicitly confirmed. You are not the kind of person who can be managed by the systems that are designed to manage people. This is not a boast. It is a description of something structural, something about the way your interior is built that makes the primary mechanisms of external control functionally ineffective on you over the long term. Those mechanisms work through predictability. They work by reading the levers of a person's psychology and applying force to those levers in calibrated ways that produce the desired response. They work because most people's psychology contains those levers in accessible form, and because most people, when pressure is applied to those levers, respond in predictable ways. Your levers are different. Not absent, you are human. You have vulnerabilities. The pressure of your life has found real things in you and pressed on them, and the pressing has been real and costly, but different. Located in places that the standard instruments are not calibrated to find. Responding to pressure in ways that the standard models are not designed to predict. Oriented toward a source of authority that exists inside you and that does not bend to external authority structures the way the models require it to bend. This means that everything they have tried, in the various rooms and systems and relationships that have tried to manage you, the doubt seeding, the framework imposing, the persistent pressure toward a smaller version of yourself, has had a ceiling. A limit past which it could not go, because past that limit is something in you that was built in a place none of that pressure could reach. Built in the quiet, in the interior, in the years of choosing your own perception over the consensus, in the accumulated refusals to let external reality fully overwrite internal truth. That something is what they encountered. That something is what shocked the room. That something is what makes today, every day that you move through the world fully inhabiting it, a day when the most sophisticated systems built to predict and manage human beings are quietly, privately, without announcement, confronted with the limits of what they were built to predict and manage. They are still trying to understand you. They will be for a while. You do not need to help them. You do not need to make yourself more legible to the instruments that were not built to read you. You do not need to reduce what you are to a size that fits their categories. You need to do what you have always done, in the rooms that have always been yours, with the people who are waiting for exactly what you are going to bring. Move through the world as the thing that shocked the room, as the thing the instruments failed on, as the thing that the experts, at the end of their expertise, had to sit within a different quality of silence than the silence they usually sit in. Move through it completely, without management, without the careful reduction, without apology for what you are. The next video on your screen carries the piece about what happens in the world around someone who stops reducing themselves, what shifts, what arrives, what becomes possible when the full version of you is finally occupying the full space of your life. Click it now. Stay in this. What is opening here does not close.